So I don't know if you noticed, but in that reading that Jim just read to us, there's this weird little section that has like 4 different references to locusts. Right? The great locust and the little locust and then the swarm of locusts. It's actually repeated twice. So in the very first chapter, Joel talks about these locusts, and then in this piece that we hear now, Joel talks about the locusts. And I read that and I was sort of like curious, like why these references to locusts? So I went to all of the commentaries, I went and I checked out a whole bunch, and nobody can explain why. Joel makes these references, but to us it sounds very strange because it says the big locust and the baby locust and all the locusts and the swarm of locusts. But in Hebrew or Arabic, it's actually 4 different words. So it's 4 different words that talk about locusts in different ways. So it reminded me of the fact that, the Inuit people of Canada have, like, I'm told, like 100 words for snow. Now, it's not for snow. It's like ice and snow and frozen rain and this and this and this and this. But we have to remember that when we hear we're hearing it in English, and in some ways, we have a much broader vocabulary, but in some ways, we have, like, locusts aren't very important to us, right? We don't really, like, when's the last time you saw a swarm of locusts? Now, some places, it is important, but for us, it's not that big a deal. So when we hear it, and we only have one word, locusts. And so, but when we hear it in Scripture, we have to remember that it's a much bigger people of Israel, and so they have different ways of talking about it, and the fact that there are 4 terms describing those locations is an important event in the community. Just wanted to point that out because I know when I've read it, and every time I read it, it's jarring. But anyway, I will have you know that Joel is considered one of the 12 minor prophets of Israel. Micah is also one of the minor prophets of Israel. Minor is not because they're less or more important, it's because their books are shorter. That's why they're called minor prophets. The books are shorter, so Isaiah is like this expansive piece, Jeremiah is an expansive piece. The 12 minor prophets, Joel is 3 chapters. Unless you're using another version of the Bible, and it's 4 chapters, but that's only because that version cuts chapter 2. So the last 4 verses in chapter 2 are considered a chapter on their own. I don't know why, doesn't really matter. What you will be happy to hear is that Joel is not my favorite minor prophet. Of course, Micah is. But Joel is not my favorite minor prophet. But Joel's a very important book. If you read the whole book of Joel, and it will take you 5 minutes. So if you want to do it when you go home, I encourage you to do it. Because you'll see that in the book of Joel, there's a lot of imagery that comes back. It comes back throughout the Gospels, actually, as people look at Jesus and they think about who Jesus is, and when they realize he's the Messiah, they have expectations, and some of those expectations come from the book. Because it says when the Son of Man, or when God restores Israel, that there will be a great army that comes forward. And they will be following the leader. And so Jesus is, the leader has been understood as the Messiah, and the Messiah would be leading this army forward to vanquish their foes. So people who were experiencing Jesus and came to understand him as Messiah obviously started asking, when is this army going to appear? When are we going to vanquish our foes? When is Israel going to be raised up to the places where it's supposed to be? So that's a question that echoed and continues to echo through the Gospels. Joel is also the prophet who Peter quotes during his speech in Acts. When Peter speaks to the community and he says, your young people will see visions and your old folks will dream dreams, or maybe it's vice versa. But Peter points to Joel as this is a sign. This is a sign of this time of fruition and the restoration happening. Because your young people, your elderly, they're dreaming dreams, they're having visions, they're prophesying, they're proclaiming that it's coming out of so it's a grassroots movement that's rising up because God is calling it forward. Now these particular chapters, or these particular verses that we just heard, they are really a linchpin in the prophet Joel's writings, and they're a linchpin in the understanding of where the people of Israel are in relationship to God. Because they've gone through this incredible time of drought and famine, and there's been an attack of locusts in the fields. Now, I saw a video, actually not too long ago, of a swarm of locusts landing in a field. And it is terrifying. It's like you know the I don't know what birds they are, but the ones that you see them and they're flying. They're like there's thousands of them, and they're flying sort of in formation, and right. Starlings? Okay, starlings. So I'm not a bird watcher. Birds are birds. We actually try and stay away from birds because Reverend Charles got a little thing with birds. But anyway. But you see those birds, they're kind of flying, and it almost looks like there's one, and that kind of goes, and then all of the rest of them follow. And then another one will sort of fly off in another direction. All of them follow that one too. And I'm amazed by it. But locusts are like that. Like this video I saw, the locust just came down and took over a field and ravaged it. And then they moved from that field to the next field, to the next field, to the next, until there's nothing left. So the people of Israel, who Joel is addressing now, that's what they've just experienced it. And unlike James, who we're studying and who we did have a extensive preaching series on, James, who says, when bad things happen, you can't blame God. Right? God does not bring bad things on. God does not bring temptation into your life. That is not the responsibility of God. Bad things happen. There is a book written, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People, by Rabbi Kushner. Bad things happen. But the people of Israel at that time, the of bad things happening was It was an instrument of God. And so Joel has this piece of God saying, I will withdraw the armies that I sent. And then what's going to happen? You enjoy fields filled with grain and vineyards filled with grapes and wine vats overflowing. So there's this acknowledgement on the part of Joel of what's happened, but the expression of great hope for what's to come. Now, we are, here at St. John Stevensville, we are celebrating our 200th anniversary. 200 years of worship in this space, or in this place, on this land, in this community. Now, I guarantee you, when the people who formed this church, that first German community mixed with a mix of faiths and denominations, which I've been talking about quite a bit over the last days at Boo at the Zoo. People who've come and said, the United Church, I was shocked because someone said, that's Methodists and Presbyterians, and I'm like, yeah. And what about your church? And so I've had these great conversations about our church over the last couple of days, and I anticipate a few more conversations over the next couple of days. But I guarantee you that when those people who first formed this church had that idea, now remember, They were all immigrants. They were migrants from other lands who had come here. At first, I'm pretty sure that they would have been a little bit uncertain. But then they realized that there was this circle of people who needed to have a vehicle, a place where they could worship. And it didn't matter that some were Jews and some were Christians and some were gypsies and some were probably, Methodists and others. It didn't matter what the fact that there was this whole slew of difference. They found a place of unity and union. It would have been a time of incredible hope. But then 200 years have happened. And I can tell you that there have been times in that 200 years when that hope was not there. When there was doubt and concern and confusion, anxiety. One of them, and this is the one that I come back to more often than not, because people ask about this too. So remember, and for those of you who are not United Church or not traditionally United Church, 1988 might not mean anything to you. Might not mean anything to you. But 1988 is the year that the United Church of Canada finally came to the decision. It had been a decade or more of conversation and study. But 1988 is when the United Church of Canada voted, that indeed all people were loved and created by God. And that sexual orientation did not matter. That you could be a full member of the United Church of Canada regardless of who you loved and how you loved them. And what full membership meant was that you could be ordained into the ministry. At that time, this church was down to 6 people. 6 people. 6 faithful people who held on. Now, I can only imagine how they would have felt reading the first half of Joel. Just defeated. Now, maybe I'm reading my own thing into that, because I would have felt defeated. I would have felt like, oh, God, why? What is this about? How could we make such a courageous and, I will say, gospel-centered decision and still have this happen to us? But here, they continued to worship. They found a minister. Some of them made tremendous sacrifice to ensure that this place would stand united. And it's because of their faithful witness and their faithful stand have this place now for all of us to gather and to worship with that realization and that promise that God loves every one of us regardless of, and at that time it was sexual orientation, at other times it was race, at other times it was gender, at other times we are here because they withstood. They saw the trial. And they knew that the trial hadn't been brought to them by God. God wasn't punishing them because they made a decision, because it was a faithful decision. But they knew that God traveled with them and God would restore. So, Carol, when she was talking to the children, said, like there was a point over the last couple of weeks, actually over the last couple of weeks, she wasn't feeling very thankful. Our lives have those pieces in them. We have very high highs. I've had very high highs. I have also had very low lows. Lows when, you get to that point and you go, why, God? Or, even more challenging, where are you, God? But we hold the faith. We travel forward. We see the challenges. But we also are blessed to see the miracles in our midst. Our faith challenges us at those times to move forward, to continue putting one step in front of the other. Last week I redecorated the windows at the Embrace Center. And in one of the windows, I have a book. Actually, if you see my office, I have lots of books. But I have a book. I have a number of copies of it because I've been thinking about doing a study of it. And it's a book that's dedicated to the poem Footprints. I love that poem. And I'm going to finish with I'm not going to tell you the whole poem because, it's longer and I don't memorize things. But the gist of the poem is that a man commits himself to God. And then he's walking along the beach and he looks back at the footprints in the sand. And he sees two sets of footprints. So he knows that God is walking with him. But then he realizes that in those very difficult times, the times when the locusts are eating the fields, and he's been despairing, he's been overwhelmed, he looks back and he sees only one set of footprints. And he says, he stops. He stops in his tracks and he looks and he says, God, because it's a good time, so God's right beside him. God, what's going on? I mean, and in the most difficult times of my life, you abandoned me, and there was only one set of footprints in the sand. And God looks at him and he goes, my son, you're misunderstanding the footprints. He said, it's at those times when you were at your lowest, when you were at your most despairing, at your most anxious. It was at those times that I carried you. I brought you forward because I knew that the times were going to get better and you would once again be able to walk on your own. Remember, friends, that it is at those times, those most difficult, challenging, anxiety-riven times in our lives, that God not only is with us, God is closest to us. It's at those times when God carries us in God's arms, holds us against God's breast, breathes God's breath for us. Because tomorrow is another day. And today is a day of thanksgiving because we realize that today we have invited and welcomed new people into that faith. And we have baptized people into that faith. And that faith not only gives them the stamina to walk today, but the hope to walk tomorrow. Thanks be to God.